How far does that go towards relieving the housing crisis? Andrew Teacher is a property expert and former spokesperson for the British Property Federation. Andrew, welcome to the programme.
Hi, Tony.
What do you make of this plan?
Well, it's about time we saw some radical thinking from government, but I guess to play devil's advocate with it, we have sort of seen this before. Some people, particularly those that were around about 5 or 6 years ago, will remember a thing called eco-towns, which was basically the Gordon Brown and Labour equivalent of garden cities that was announced by Gordon Brown without telling anybody in the Department for Communities at the point. And these things never happened. And it was a very similar sort of offer to the things that we've seen announced today with Bicester Village and recently with Ebbsfleet, where the government basically points its finger at a big plot of land and says, right, over there, we'll go and build 10,000 homes. And now, we're still waiting to see the detail. We're still waiting to see where the money's going to come from. But I think it's what we need to see is some of the detail around the money. But I think the principle around government taking control is correct, because at the minute, what you see at the minute, the reason why you see lots of complaints about rich house builders and all of these big listed developers, taking loads of money from people, is because we rely on the private sector to deliver government housing policy, and there has to be an acceptance with that. If you rely on the private sector, you have to accept the fact that the private sector needs to make profits, and that means that in a rising market, as we're seeing, they make lots of money, and housing goes up in price. But the point is there is quite a lot of land out there that the government can use. Lots of it's owned by councils, lots of it's owned by the MOD or the NHS, and this land can be used. The government has control of it, and if it wants to speed it through planning and find some cash in the system, it can create houses that are a bit cheaper.
But the key word there is the market. You kept mentioning that, and we talked about this earlier on Drive. Isn't there a danger here that the market haven't acted because there's no market, and the government could build 10,000 homes, spend £400 million of taxpayers' money, and not get all of it back?
Well, you need to think about what the market is created by. Now, the reason people go and live in a certain place is often because of the social infrastructure that's there. So it's not just the housing, it's the schools, it's the medical facilities, it's the shops. And the reason why Ebbsfleet has been pretty much an empty shell since it was mooted 15 years ago to go and build there is because there's nothing there other than a train station that gets you in and out of Ebbsfleet. So the reason why people commune around cities, the reason why Manchester, London, Birmingham,
it's jobs
Leeds,
rather than social amenities, surely.
Well, it's a bit of both, isn't it? I mean, you need both. But I think that you're right that where you have jobs, everything else kind of follows, doesn't it? If you've got lots of office blocks and retail, then all of the other sort of things sort of pepper around them. But what we're seeing though is that the cities are really growing over the last years. Urban living is on the rise, and that's how we need to think of it. But I think if we're going to talk about radical solutions to housing, and we're talking about keeping the economy balanced, which Mr. Alexander mentioned in your clip, then perhaps one of those radical solutions is that we don't all need to own a house. And this sort of systematic belief propelled by the media, by politicians of all parties, that you're some kind of social failure if you don't own a house and thus have a massive, great, whopping mortgage to pay for that, is a bit wrong. And I think we need to look more at renting. We need to look at housing as a service, as a consumer service. And last week, the government announced a big deal with a company called Essential Living. They're one of the first brands that are building houses for rent, and they've done a big deal using some government development finance to build 3 schemes across the southeast. And there's a bunch more of these companies that are coming out of the water, building, almost a bit like, you see companies like Zipcar that are car hire companies done in a slightly disruptive fashion. And that's what I think we need to see in housing, as well as obviously a greater focus on supply and more houses for people in affordable situations.
Okay, Andrew Teacher, thank you very much indeed. We'll get reaction from Labour's Shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Chris Leslie, in a moment, to what Andrew said and to what Danny Alexander said earlier.
And as well as those housing plans, Danny Alexander promised 2.3